Good morning, class. I miss you all, and I hope you're all being healthy and safe. Since we haven't been in class for quite some time, Ms. Hetzo and I will be recording audio readings of Native Son and putting them on our Google Classroom website for you to listen to and then answer all of the questions in response to them. Okay, so I believe we left off at page 175 in the novel. That is on page 175. If you have a blue book, uh, at the bottom where it reads Bigger, that's Peggy. Bigger had just left the ransom note under the door. If you have the PDF file of the book that I also linked earlier this morning, that is page 157 on the PDF file, but 175 in the blue book. And here we go. This is Peggy asking, Bigger, huh? He answered before he knew who had called. We all there, so I'm just making sure that this is correct. Okay. Where have you been? Your dinner's been waiting for you since 5 o'clock. There's a chair. Eat. As much as you want. As much as you want. He stopped listening. In Peggy's hand was the kidnap note. I'll heat your coffee. Go ahead and eat. Had she opened it? Did she know what was in it? No. The envelope was still sealed. She came to the table and removed the napkins. His knees were shaking with excitement and sweat broke out on his forehead. His skin felt as though he were puckering up from a blast of heat. Don't you want your steak warmed? The question reached him from far away, and he shook his head without really knowing what she meant. Don't you feel well? This is all right, he murmured. You oughtn't to starve yourself that way. I wasn't hungry. You're hungrier than you think, she said. She set a cup and saucer at his plate, then laid the letter on the edge of the table. It held his attention as though it were a steel magnet, and his eyes were ironed. She got the coffee pot and poured his cup full. No doubt she had just gotten the letter from under the door and had not yet had time to give it to Mr. Dalton. She placed a small jar of cream at the back of his cream at his plate and took up the letter again. I've got to give this to Mr. Dalton, she said. I'll be back in a moment. Yes, sir, he whispered. She left. He had stopped chewing and stared before him. His mouth was dry, but he had to eat. Not to eat now would create suspicion. He shoved the food in and chewed each mouthful a while, then washed it down with swallows of hot coffee. When the coffee gave out, he used cold water. He strained his ears to catch sounds, but none came. Then the door swung in silently, and Peggy came in. He could see nothing in her round red face. Out of the corners of his eyes, he watched her go to the stove and putter with pots and pans. Want some more coffee? No, ma'am. Yeah, you ain't scared of all this trouble we're having around here, are you, Bigger? No, ma'am, he said, wondering if something in his manner had made her ask that. Oh, that poor Mary. Peggy sighed. She acts like such a ninny. Imagine a girl keeping her parents worried sick all the time. But there are children for there are children for you these days. He hurried with his eating, saying nothing. He wanted to get out of the kitchen. The thing was in the open now. Not all of it, but some of it. Nobody knew about Mary yet. He saw in his mind a picture of Mary Dalton's family, distraught and horrified when they found that Mary was kidnapped. That would put them a certain distance from him. They would think that white men did it. They would never think that a black timid Negro did that. They would go after Jan, the red he had signed to the letter, and the hammer and the curving knife would make them look for communists. You got enough? Yes, sir. You better clean the ashes out of the furnace in the morning, Bigger. Yes, sir. And be ready for Mr. Dalton at 8. Yes, sir. Is your room all right? Yes, sir. The door swung in violently. Bigger started in a fright. Mr. Dalton came into the kitchen, his face ashy. He stared at Peggy, and Peggy, holding a dish towel in her hand, stared at him. In Mr. Dalton's hand was the letter, opened. What's the matter, Mr. Dalton? Oh, who? Where? Who gave you this? What? This letter? Why, nobody. I got it from the door. When? A few minutes ago. Anything wrong? Mr. Dalton looked around the entire kitchen, not at anything particular, but just round the entire stretch of four walls. His eyes wide and unseeing, he looked at Peggy. It was as if he had thrown himself upon her mercy, was waiting for her to say some word that would take the horror away. What's the matter, Mr. Dalton? Peggy asked again. Before Mr. Dalton could answer, Mrs. Dalton groped her way into the kitchen, her white hands held high. Bigger watched her fingers tremble through the air till they touched Mr. Dalton's shoulder. They gripped his coat hard enough to tear it from his body. Bigger, without moving an eyelid, felt his skin grow hot and his muscles stiffen. Henry, Henry, Mrs. Dalton called. What's the matter? Mr. Dalton did not hear her. He stared at Peggy. Did you see who left this letter? No, Mr. Dalton. You, Bigger. No, sir. He whispered, his mouth full of dry food. Henry, tell me, please, for heaven's sake. Mr. Dalton put his arm around Mrs. Dalton's waist and held her close to him. It's about Mary. She's where? What? Where is she? They got her. They kidnapped her. Henry, no! Mrs. Dalton screamed. Oh, no, Peggy whimpered, running to Mr. Dalton. My baby, Mrs. Dalton sobbed. She's been kidnapped, Mr. Dalton said, as though he had to say the words over again to convince himself. Bigger's eyes were wide, taking in all three of them in one constantly roving glance. Mrs. Dalton continued to sob, and Peggy sank into a chair, her face in her hands. Then she sprang up and ran out of the room, crying, Oh, Lord, don't let them kill her. Notice, by the way, how concerned Peggy is. She loved Mary like she was her own daughter. Mrs. Dalton swayed. Mr. Dalton lifted her and staggered, trying to get her through the door. As he watched Mr. Dalton, there flashed through Bigger's mind a quick image of how he had lifted Mary's body in his arms the night before. He rose and held the door open for Mr. Dalton and watched him walk unsteadily down the dim hallway with Mrs. Dalton in his arms. He was alone in the kitchen now. Again, the thought that he had the chance to walk out of here and be clear of it all came to him. Excuse me, I'm having a pull of coffee here. And again, he brushed it aside. He was tensely eager to stay and see how it would all end, even that if that end had swallowed him in blackness, right? His ambition. He felt that he was living upon a high pinnacle where bracing winds whipped about him. There came to his ears a muffled sound of sob. Then suddenly there was silence. What was happening? Would Mr. Dalton fold the police now? He strained to listen, but no sounds came. He went to the door and took a few steps into the hallway. There were still no signs. He looked about to make sure that no one was watching him. And then he crept on tiptoe down the hall. He heard voices. Mr. Dalton was talking to someone. He crept farther. Yes, he could hear. I want to talk to Britton, please. Mr. Dalton was phoning. Come right over here, please, at once. And something awful is happening. I don't want to talk about it over the phone. That meant that when Britton came back, he would be questioned again. Yes, right away. I'll be waiting. He had to get back to his room. He tiptoed along through the kitchen, down the steps, and into the basement. The torrid cracks of the furnace gleamed in the crimson darkness, and he heard the throaty undertone of the draft devouring the air. Was she burned? But even if she were not, who would think of looking into the furnace for her? He went to his room, into the closet, closed the door, and listened. Silence. He came out, left the door open, and in order to get to the closet quickly and without sounding, he pulled off his shoes. He lay again on the bed, his mind whirling with images born of a multitude of impulses. He could run away. He could remain. He could even go down and confess what he had done. The mere thought that these avenues of action were open to him made him feel free, that his life was his, that he held his future in his hands, but that they would never think that he had done it. Not a meek black boy like him. He bounded off the bed, listening, thinking that he had heard voices. He had been so deeply taken up with his own thoughts that he did not know if he had actually heard anything or imagined it. Yes, he heard faint footsteps below. He hurried to the closet. The footsteps ceased. There came to him the soft sound of sobbing. It was Peggy. Her sobbing quieted, then rose to a high pitch. He stood for a long time listening to Peggy's sobs. And the long moan of the wind sweeping through the night outside. Peggy's sobs ceased, and her footsteps sounded once more. Was she going to answer the doorbell? Footsteps came again. Peggy had gone to the front of the house for something and had come back. He heard a heavy voice, a man's, as though he could not identify it. Then he realized it was Britton's. And you found the notes? Yes. How long ago? About an hour. You're sure you didn't see anyone leave it? It was sticking under the door. Sit down. Did you see anybody about the house or in the drive-in? No, the boy, I mean. That's all who has been around here. And where's the boy now? Upstairs in his room, I think. Did you ever see his handwriting before? No, Mr. Britton. Can you guess? Can you think? Imagine who would send such a note? Excuse me. No, not a soul in this wide world, Mr. Britton. Peggy wailed. Britton's voice ceased. There was the sound of other heavy feet. Chairs scraped about over the floor. More people were in the kitchen. Who were they? Their movements sounded like those of men. Then Bigger heard Britton speaking again. Listen, Peggy, tell me, how does this boy act? What do you mean, Mr. Britton? Does he seem intelligent? Does he seem to be acting? I don't know, Mr. Britton. He's just like all the other colored boys. Does he say yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am? Yes, Mr. Britton. He's polite. Does he seem to be trying to appear like he's more ignorant than he really is? I don't know, Mr. Britton. Have you missed anything around the house since he's been here? No, nothing. Has he ever insulted you or anything? Oh, no. What kind of boy is he? He's just a quiet colored boy. That's all I can say. Did you ever see him reading anything? Oh, no, Mr. Britton. Notice here, reading is a bad sign for Bigger because that makes him seem like he might be a communist. And that's what Mr. Britton is trying to figure out. Does he speak more intelligently at times than others? No, Mr. Britton. He talked always the same to me. Has he ever done anything that would make you think he knows something about this note? No, Mr. Britton. When you speak to him, does he hesitate before he answers, as though he's thinking of what to say? No, Mr. Britton. He talks and acts natural like. When he talks, does he wave his hands around a lot, like he's been around a lot of Jews? I've never noticed, Mr. Britton. Did you ever hear him call anyone comrade? No, Mr. Britton. Does he pull off his cap when he comes in the house? I never noticed. I think so, Mr. Britton. Has he ever sat down in your presence without being asked, like he was used to being around white people? No, Mr. Britton. Only when I told him to. Does he speak first or does he wait until he's spoken to? Oh, Mr. Britton, he seemed always to wait until spoken to. Until we spoke to him before he said anything. Now listen, Peggy. Think and try to remember. If his voice goes up when he talks like Jews when they talk. Know what I mean? You see, Peggy, I'm trying to find out if he's been around communists. Oh, no, Mr. Britton. He just talks like all the other colored folks to me. Where did you say he is now? Upstairs in his room. When Britton's voice ceased, Bigger was smiling. Yes, Britton was trying to trap him, trying to make out a case against him, but he could not find anything to go upon. Was Britton coming to talk to him now? There came the sound of other voices. It's a 10-to-1 chance that she's dead. Yeah, they usually dump him off. They're scared of them after they get him. They think they might identify him afterwards. Did the old man say that he was going to pay? Sure, he wants his daughter back. That's just $10,000. Shut the hell, you ask me. But he wants the girl. Say, I bet those Reds are trying to raise money. Yeah, maybe that's how they got their dough. They say that guy Bruno Hauptmann, the one that staged the Lindy baby, did it for the Nazis. They needed the money, right? Remember the historical reference on Google Classroom to the Lindenberg baby. I like to shoot every one of those goddamn bastards. Red or not red, or no red. There was the sound of a door opening and more footsteps.
Hey, you have any luck with the old man? Not yet, it was Britton's voice. He's pretty washed up then, eh? Yeah, and who wouldn't be? He won't call the cops? Nah, he's scared stiff. It might be hard on the family, but if you let them snatches know they can't scare money out of you, they'll stop. Hey, say Britton, try him again. Yeah, tell him I'm there. Ain't nothing to do now but to call the cops. Sorry, I haven't read in a few weeks. Here we go. Out loud, that is. Oh, I don't know. I hate to worry him. Well, after all, it is his daughter. Let him handle this. But listen, Britt, when they pick up this alone fella, he's going to tell the cops and the papers. He'll have a story anyway. So call him now. The sooner they get started, the better. Nah, I'll wait till the old man to give me the signal. Bigger knew that Mr. Dalton had not wanted to notify the police. That much was certain. But how long would he hold out? The police would now, the police would know everything as soon as Jan was picked up, for Jan would tell enough to make the police and the papers investigate. But if Jan were confronted with the fact of the kidnapping of Mary, what would happen? Could Jan prove an alibi? If he did, then the police would start looking for someone. They would start questioning him again. They would want to know why he had lied about Jan's being in the house. But would not the word red, which had been signed on the ransom note, throw them off the tracks and make them still think that Jan or his comrades did it? Why would anybody want to think that Bigger had kidnapped Mary? Bigger came out of the closet and wiped sweat off from his forehead with his sleeve. He had knelt so long that his blood had almost stopped. A needle-like pain shot from the bottom of his feet to the calves of his legs. He went to the window and looked out at the swirling snow. He could hear the wind rising. It was a blizzard, all right. The snow moved in no given direction, but filled the world with a vast white storm of flying powder. White oppression. The sharp currents of the wind could be seen as whirls of snow twisting like miniature tornadoes. The window overlooked an alley to the right of which was 45th Street. He tried the window to see if it would open. He lifted a few inches, then all the way up. A loud and screechy sound. Had anyone heard him? He waited. Nothing happened. Good. If the worst came to the worst, he could jump out of this window right here and run away. It was 2 stories to the ground, and there was a deep drift of snow just below him. He lowered the window and laid again on the bed, waiting. The sound of firm feet came doom, 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 came up the stairs. Yes, someone was coming up. His body grew rigid. A knock came from the door. Yes, sir. Open up! He pulled on the light, opened the door, and met a white face. They want you downstairs. Yes, sir. The man stepped to one side and Bigger went past him on the The men stepped to one side and Bigger went past him down the hall and down the steps into the basement. We're on page 183, but mind you, feeling the eyes of the white man on his back and hearing as he neared the furnace the muffled breathing of the fire and seen directly before his eyes Mary's bloody head with its jet black curly hair shining in wet blood on our crumpled newspapers. He saw, metaphor there, blood on the newspapers. Will Bigger be killed by the media? He saw Britton standing near the furnace with 3 white men. Hello, Bigger. Yes, sir, Bigger said. You heard what happened? Yes, sir. Listen, boy, you're talking just to me and my men here. Now tell me, do you think Jan's mixed up in this? Bigger's eyes fell. He did not want to answer in a hurry, and he did not want to blame Jan, definitely, for that would make them question him too closely. He would hint and point in Jan's direction. Ooh, Bigger's getting savvy. I don't know, sir, he said. Just tell me, what do you think? I don't know, sir, Bigger said again. You really saw him here last night, didn't you? Oh, yes, sir. You'd swear he told you to take the trunk down and leave the car in the snow. I swear, what's true, sir, said Bigger. Did he act like he had anything up his sleeve? I don't know, sir. What time did you say you left? A little before 2, sir. Britton turned to the other men, one of whom stood near the furnace with his back to the fire, warming his hands behind him. The man's legs were sprawled wide apart, and a cigar glowed in the corner of his mouth. It must have been that red, Britton said to him. Yeah, said the man. Said the man at the furnace. What would he have got? Sorry. Yeah, said the man at the furnace. What would he have the boy take the joint down for and leave the car out? It was to throw us off the scent. Listen, Bigger. Listen, Bigger, said Britton. Did you see the guy acting anyway out of the order? I mean, sort of nervous to say. Just what did he talk about? You talked about commies. Did he ever ask you to join? He gave me that stuff to read. Come on, tell us some of the things he said. Bigger knew the things that the white folks hated to hear Negroes ask for, and he knew that these were things that Reds were always asking for, and he knew that the white folks did not like to hear these things asked for even by whites who fought for Negroes. Well, Bigger said, feeling reluctant, he told me that someday there wouldn't be no rich and no poor folks. He did say that, right? Jan did say, one day there'll be no rich and no poor folks. Yeah. And he said a black man would have a chance. Go on. And he said there would be no more lynching. And what was the girl saying? She agreed with him. How did you feel toward them? I don't know, sir. I mean, did you like them? He knew that the average white man would not approve of his liking such talk. It was my job. I just did what they told me, he mumbled. Did the girl act in any way scared? He sensed what kind of a case they were trying to build against Jan. And he remembered that Mary had cried last night when he had refused to go in the cafe with her to eat. Well, I don't know, sir. She was crying once. Crying? The men crowded about. Yes, sir. Did he hit her? I didn't see that. What did he do then? Well, he put his arms around her and she stopped. Peter had his back to a wall. The crimson luster of the fire gleamed on the white men's faces. The sound of air being sucked upward through the furnace mingled in Bigger's ears with the faint whine of the wind outside in the night. He was tired. Sorry, I'm silencing my phone here. He was tired. He was tired. He closed his eyes a long second and then opened them, knowing that he had to keep alert and answer questions to save himself now. Did this Jan fellow say anything to you about white women? Bigger tightened with him on. So, did he say he would let you meet white women if you joined the Reds? He knew that sexual relations between blacks and whites was repulsive to most white men. No, sir, he said, stimulating abashment. Did Jan lay the girl? I don't know, sir. Did you take them to a room or a hotel? No, sir, just to the park. They were in the back seat? Yes, sir. How long were you in the park? Well, about 2 hours, I reckon, sir. Come on now, boy. Did he lay the girl? I don't know, sir. They was back there kissing and going on. Was she lying down? Well, yes, sir, she was. Peter said, lowering his eyes because he felt that it would be better to do so. He knew that whites thought that all Negroes yearned for white women. Therefore, he wanted to show a certain fearful deference, even when one's name was mentioned in his presence. They were drunk, weren't they? Yes, sir. They've been drinking a lot. He heard the sounds of autos coming in the driveway. Was this the police? Who's that? Britton asked. I don't know, said one of the men. I better go see. Bigger saw after Britton had opened the door for a car standing in the snow with headlights glowing. Who's that? Britton called. The press! Oh, there's nothing for you. Britton called in an uneasy voice. Don't stall us, a voice said. Some of it's already in the papers. You may as well tell the rest. What's in the papers? Britton asked as the men entered the basement. A tall, red-faced man shoved his hand into his pocket, brought forth a newspaper, and handed it to Britton. The Reds say you're charging him with spiriting away for the old man's daughter. Bigger darted a glance at the paper where he was. He saw red nabbed as girl vanishes. God damn, said Britton. right? They don't want it in the newspapers. Phew, said the tall, red-faced man. What a night! Red arrested snowstorm, and this place down here looks like somebody's been murdered. Come on, you. You're in Mr. Dalton's household. Oh, I'm sorry. Where's the old man? Upstairs. He doesn't want to be bothered. Is that girl really missing, or is this just a stunt? I can't tell you anything, Britton said. Who's that boy there? Just keep quiet, Bigger. Is he the alone that said accused him? Bigger stood against the wall and looked around vaguely. You're gonna pull the dumb act on us. That's one of the men. Listen, you guys, said Britton. Take it easy. I'll go and see if the old man wants to see you. That's the time. We're waiting. All the wires are carrying the story. Britton went up the steps and left Bigger standing with the crowd of men. Hey, your name's Bigger Thomas? The red-faced man asked him. Keep quiet, Bigger said. Keep quiet, Bigger, said one of Britton's men. Bigger said nothing. Say, what's this all about? This important big to me.
And we're going to stop on page 187 for today. Thank you for following along with the reading. Feel free to read ahead if you like, and but don't spill the frijoles. Have a wondrous afternoon. I look forward to seeing all of you very soon. Hopefully, stay safe, healthy, social distance yourself from others who could get you and your family sick. Thank you. Goodbye.